It's fully threaded radio, unthreaded.
Hi, everyone. Eric Dudas here, coming to you from semi-rural Northeast Ohio. This episode of the podcast is a conversation that I'd say it's about time we had. I'm joined by two very sharp guys, Anders Green with ALOX 4 and Sam Aldinger. Many of you know him from his long career at Fastener. We recently did an episode with him. He's operating under the Highland Consulting flag these days. Both of these gentlemen understand fastener sourcing quite well and bring a lot of technical experience to the discussion. Anders, as he grows his fledgling ERP system, which is 100% cloud-based, and it's being written as we go in the era of AI. And Sam, who's concentrating very heavily on B2B e-commerce, which many people are discovering is quite a bit different from B2C e-commerce. And of course, the fastener industry unto itself is a unique animal. During this conversation, we talk a lot about what we imagine a truly AI-powered sourcing platform would look like and what it would need to do. Along the way, we hear Sam and Anders freestyle a little bit in their various areas of expertise. Drawing from our different backgrounds, it turns into a pretty far-reaching discussion. So if you've wrestled with some of the problems, some of the challenges of utilizing AI to do what you need to do in your fastener B2B e-commerce journey, you'll take away a lot from this conversation, if only to commiserate on some of the roadblocks that you're hitting. On the other hand, maybe you're way ahead of us and you can laugh down your sleeve at us. I don't know. We don't have all the answers here. It was a completely unscripted dialogue that we had. Originally, by the way, it was intended to be an experiment into AI video podcasting, which is something that I've put off for a long time, and I'm still really dinking around with the video for this. And I decided things are moving so fast in the AI world, I better just get out the audio, which I'm very comfortable doing. So here it is. This conversation took place about 2 weeks ago, publishing on June 30th, 2025. The title sponsors of Fully Threaded Radio are Bright & Best International, Global Fasteners, and Star Stainless. Fully Threaded is also sponsored by Buckeye Fasteners, BTM Manufacturing, Eurolink Fastener Supply Service, Fastener Technology International, InSequel Software, Jaylan Franco, MW Components, Solution Industries, Volt Industrial Plastics, and Worth Industry USA. This episode with Sam and Anders is probably not for everybody. However, if you have anything to do with driving your business sales team or technical team, you're going to pick up a few ideas, I'm quite sure. Appreciate you clicking in. Here now is my conversation with Sam Aldinger and Anders Green.
Upset, but I can also understand that those people sometimes don't realize the depth of the infrastructure stack that they are relying on.
The infrastructure stack, yes. Anders Green, I rely on you to bring up such matters when we're talking about podcasting.
Within the first 5 seconds, that's where we're starting.
That's
well,
right.
I mean, I think we can say as much as the world has always run on an infrastructure stack. So, but traditionally, it has been more like, boats, planes, fuel, energy. That has been the infrastructure that we've relied on to move everything in the world. Fasteners, media, everything. Even if you look at the traditional media distribution, it was spools of film being mailed to theaters. Distribution has always been a key to that. And it's just that now so much more of our distribution stack is technology, databases, internet connectivity, storage, bits, servers.
Digital transformation.
Mm-hmm. It is
going digital.
Yeah. When you see the truck broken down on the side of the road, it's easy to be like, man, those guys are having a bad day. Flat tire, everything's hot. I feel bad for those guys. I'm not going to get so angry at the store because they don't have my stuff. When it's just a blinky red light inside a Google farm somewhere, there's a lot less empathy and sympathy happening because you're like, I don't know, dude, all the stuff's right there. You still have air conditioning. Why isn't all my stuff working? So I think it's easier to ratchet up the frustration when you can't see why something is broken. That's my hot take. That's my opening hot take.
Well, Anders Green, you're with Alox 4. You're a newer ERP on the block trying to make a toehold for yourself out there in the industry. And I'm sure that as you go to the shows and the association meetings and all that, as you insert yourself into this industry, which, by the way, you've done a pretty good job at these last few years since I first started seeing you show up here and there. But you're probably still talking to guys. There's not many left anymore, but they're still running their business on on Cardex.
I have seen at least one place that I visited in person that was still literal index cards.
Right. Well, anyway, there's a couple of them here in the Cleveland area too, and the only reason I bring it up is because those guys, when we have these brownout situations, they get to sort of act all smug and self-righteous. But I'm not advocating for that, but it's definitely something I think about a lot. Sam Aldinger, you're, of course, tucked away up there in the northern climes of the country, Winona, Minnesota, homesteading yourself to health and happiness. Good to see both of you guys here. Thanks for jumping on.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here, Eric.
So we tried this last week, and I thought it was me, or at least something that was in our tech setup. And as it turns out, there was kind of a global-wide Google brownout. I guess some of their data centers, I'm not sure if it went over into the Amazon cloud as well, but Google's was on its back for a day. And with all the geopolitical upheaval, shall we call it nicely, going on, it makes you wonder if that wasn't a little bit of, setting the battleground or something. Anders, what's your take on that?
I've actually had a little bit of research into that stuff, and it turns out that there was some new technology that they deployed that had to do essentially with some of their settings and how they handled the load of various things. And normally when they do that, each piece of that is sort of hidden behind a feature flag. So they turn it on like 1%, 5%, 10%, 50%, everybody. And this particular feature was not built with that protection. And it also had a problem. So it immediately caused like a boot loop and just tore down everything. So the good news is Google was pretty on top of it. They managed to have it diagnosed within about 10 minutes and then had a fix for it in about 40 minutes. And then it took several hours for that fix to propagate throughout the rest of the cloud and get back to where it was supposed to be. So, oops.
A little blip. In my experience, to your point about the geopolitical, Eric, the immediate assumption by most individuals is that it's, there's a bigger cause behind it. And in my personal practical experience, I've been on the receiving end of, I know exactly what happened on the backside, but then you have people within the company coming and saying, oh, there's so much of this stuff going on and we don't see it all. And, and it's like, no, Jimmy forgot to write the right code. It's like he screwed up and there's no ulterior motive. There's no anything going on. Somebody just really didn't think.
Jimmy wrote it and then it was right, but then he commented out one piece for testing and he forgot to uncomment that piece out when he deployed it. Yep. And Jimmy, we've told you before. This is actually the third time, Jimmy. Come on.
Oh, I've been there, believe me. In my application developer days, I've seen lots of those, but nothing on the scale of this, when you're working at Google scale or, like remember when the whole Cloudflare thing happened, when they propagated that whole Microsoft upgrade, the server upgrade that went bad and 10.5 million servers worldwide were affected in about an hour. I mean, these are the kinds of things that it's a scale I can't even wrap my mind around. Of course, this leads me into a topic that I wanted to talk about with you guys because I've been working with you both individually and we've been sort of doing a few team ideas here lately. And what strikes me is, of course, Sam, you're used to working in a large corporate system, shall we say, an ecosystem where you've got people to do this and teams to do that. And, you're looking downstream, upstream for everything. Right. And then there's guys like Anders, who's really a one-man show in a lot of ways and two opposite ends of the spectrum. And so when we have these conversations, it's interesting to see the different perspectives and how that impacts whatever we're talking about, whatever project idea.
Absolutely, scale makes a huge difference. I mean, when I worked at IBM and the cafeteria that I ate at served 5,000 people every day and was one of 3 cafeterias on site, we did things very differently. And now much smaller team. Certainly I can come to work in my shorts. So scale's very different, and where Sam has been, there's certainly more layers involved in all that management, and bringing a more powerful team in at that scale also changes all the capabilities and what you can get done.
I would say it's as with anything, there's good and bad along every step of the maturity curve. When you're young or when you're small, let's just say in this context of, let's just say development or business teams, whatever, you can be very nimble. You can make decisions very quickly. And essentially you can show progress and make these very small, fast, incremental wins. As you add more teams, as you add more structured processes, you add more tape, but you also, to your point of scale, have the ability to present itself and become a more sophisticated structure in which you have safeguards against some of the, somebody accidentally put, comments, hid the comments in the code or whatever you had mentioned. That doesn't happen the more structured you get, because you do allow these processes to come in and govern risks like this from happening, and which can be a really, really good thing, but it becomes a lot more complex. And what happens then is this individual over in this team doesn't fully understand all the way to the other end of the side, spectrum, what's happening over here, and you have a lack of appreciation for all the different functions that happen. So by nature, you have to work very hard to keep a cohesive unit going in the same direction. And it just presents itself different challenges. Again, you have more resources. You're able to really master your craft in certain areas. You can focus and have really strong subject matter expertise in, specific areas, like, for example, introducing parts into your system. I'm going to go into the product data side, but putting streamlined processes for capturing really good, mature data up front within your part activation process that never happened before with a small team. You just were happy to get something filled out and in the system to use. So that, like a parent with a child, you can always regret. I wish we were still at that age, or I wish that, we were in our infant eras. But there's a lot of things you didn't like then either that you wish you had. You gotta enjoy every step of the way for different reasons. And it creates new challenges. It creates your own personal growth, etc. Trying to step back out of that and learn to appreciate that while not getting caught up in the thick of it and forgetting perspective is always a detriment to people.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing more magical than watching your child take their first steps. But when you're trying to walk down the beach and the kid has no speed, and you're like, come on, we need to make it to where the sandwiches are. And you're like, oh, I wish he was, 15 and we could just go there.
Hey everyone, hope you're enjoying the conversation. Thanks for clicking in. Most of you know that since 2006, I've been a part of the FCH sourcing network that's found at fastenersclearinghouse.com. I hope your teams are all out there using it whenever the need comes up to find a hard-to-find part, something that's out of stock, got to make a spot buy, that kind of thing. Most of you know that part of FCH is our FCH Source Finder program. It's a broadcast RFQ system, blasts out RFQs all the time, and we've seen a real uptick in people looking for material lately. I'm sure some of it has to do with the tariff situation. We all know what's going on. talking a lot about AI in this conversation you're listening to. You're helping us to figure out how to route these things better. And we're getting lots more inquiries, but we're also getting people on the other side of the equation, including domestic manufacturers. So we've traditionally been more focused on distribution. That picture's changing a little bit. Anyway, FCH Sourcing Network, we're growing. We're pushing things as hard as we can. We're a small operation, so every click counts for us. Thanks for being out there, folks. Now back to the conversation with Sam and Anders.
Yep. Every piece of the scale has different strengths. 100%.
Some of the greatest humor that there is smaller companies trying to appear big and vice versa, where some of these massive conglomerates are trying to appear down home and they just completely fail. You know, they miss it. There's a lot of that with social media where they're trying to appear, you know, hey, your friends from Monsanto. You know, it doesn't fly. But I remember when Brian and I were really trying to present the illusion that we had some bandwidth and some team, and we were doing work for some pretty decent sized banks. And they took things very seriously. You know, they weren't used to dealing with barefoot guys, you know, working in a, 2-room apartment and passing themselves off as a bona fide, technology team. But that's what we were doing. And I remember my test user always used to be a fictitious test user was Spanky Baez. And I put all these prompts in some of my code, and it was all there just for, error handling as I was stepping through some of the code. And we had a big release the next day. It was like a beta release. And I remember being in the background of this call, and the business leader who had hired us, who was presenting this to his clients, we were supposed to be the men behind the curtain. But I remember being on the call, and I wasn't watching, but I was listening. And I remember him saying, Spanky Baez, who's Spanky Baez? And just getting that, that feeling of like, oh no, that dread. And it happens, we got busted many times, which explains how we wound up in the fastener industry, I suppose.
Well, what you and Brian have been able to stand up, impresses me just in terms of, you've created a really good platform, essentially, really on the backs of you and Brian and your small team, and what you've been able to achieve is pretty impressive.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, there's a lot of proverbial baling wire and duct tape back there holding it together, as well as a couple of hamsters, on wheels, but it gets the job done, and it's been running for a while. That brings us to a subject that we should probably touch on, Sam and Anders. When I started off the conversation here a second ago, I was talking about our collaboration that we have going, and we've been talking a lot about inquiries and the FCH Source Finder inquiry program that we've been thinking about a lot for different reasons. And we're trying to really turn this thing into a much more useful tool for the industry. And I look at it, and I think Brian shares this idea, but we look at it as a very late stage prototype. So it's actually been running, SourceFinder's been running as a system for, how long has it been? I don't know.
10 or 15 years now?
Well, yeah, we probably released it in 2009, I would say. So it's been out there for a while, and it's, we've helped out a lot of people with it, but we're looking to make it better. So Anders, you're running ALOX 4, and you're building a module into your platform that's sort of a ground up source finder collaboration. And then Sam, you're doing all kinds of things with B2B e-commerce. So you've got a very, very large swath of experience in e-commerce as it applies explicitly for fasteners. And we're trying to see what we can do with this thing.
Interestingly enough, Source Finder, if I'm not mistaken, is really the intent is that the user comes in and can't find the specific product they're working for, but then ultimately says, but I need help finding who can get me this. And in my experience, that's a sourcing function, hence Source Finder. You are sourcing at this point. You're not actually creating the acquisition. You're not creating the transaction. You are trying to find and match a supplier or find a provider of this said item. And in my experience, and as I've gotten into B2B e-commerce in general, is that this sourcing function within B2B is a very underappreciated function in that everybody downplays how much time and how frustrating it is for a buyer to go out and find something. And the process itself is very manually intensive. It's one thing if you're talking about a Milwaukee tool. If I'm going to buy a cordless drill that I could pick up at Home Depot, Lowe's, whoever your local hardware store is, whatever, you can go just as easily online and find that same cordless drill. So sourcing that item in and of itself actually isn't that hard. You do a Google search, or you have a model number or something like that, and Google or whoever provides you with results. And you can pick whatever fun marketplace you want. There's your digital e-commerce, more of a B2C platform, but you can buy that tool. So the sourcing exercise there is easy, and that's what 99% of people in the world, in my opinion, thinks as sourcing. But now if you were to give them this paper clip that I play with as my little fidget, whatever, and you ask them to go source a paper clip, you only have a description. You don't have a part number. You don't have anything. You have a description. So everybody's attempt to describe this thing can vary unless you really know paper clips. You'll know the gauge of wire or whatever is used. You'll know the style of paperclip, and very few people in the world are like that. But you set somebody like myself to go find this paperclip just like this, find this online. I would spend probably hours if my job was to find this exact paperclip.
Yeah, good luck.
Because I have to be confident in the data that I'm looking at. I have to sift through the myriad of non-existent information and try to piece together. I don't have brand information that's recognizable. I could guess, but I don't know. I have to start measuring this thing, and I might, with my ruler, measure it in a different way where it's millimeters versus inches. And I don't know if whoever made this in millimeters or they make it at inches or what. There's just, when it comes to commodity, and so all of this across fasteners, in my mind, adds a whole level of complexity of sourcing that is very underappreciated in the market. And it all, in my humble, biased opinion, is all about presenting good, accurate data. And that's from the supplier side or from the platform side. And from the customer side, it's actually requesting good data. Because when I'm a customer, I'm going to go on and I'm just going to type staple. Well, that doesn't tell you anything from a data perspective of what or paperclip. I'm sorry. See, and some customers would put stable, but getting on a tangent here. But if I typed in paperclip, I would just have to peruse through paperclips and try to find manually, what paperclip seems to match what's in my hand right now. And while not all B2B business is like that, there is a large piece of maintenance and of scrambling that happens in a day, every day, for items that you don't have a lot of data on, or that the user has to input data on in order for it to match the receiver or the platform or the manufacturer or whatever. And that is a huge art that I'm finding is almost non-existent, because most of the B2C companies are not used to this type of shopping experience. They want to give you their best item. They want you to take it, and they think that your application isn't critical. So they'll take whatever's close. But you can't do that in most industrial applications. You just can't. And when suggestions are made, they're made in a vacuum, not knowing what application you're using, the criticalness of it. Can we swap a grade 5 for a grade 8? Can we change a material? Like, nobody knows, because you don't have customer information.
I'm starting to wonder if I had European like A5 sized paper, would I be allowed to use a paperclip that was measured in English units, or would I have to get a metric millimeter paperclip? These are questions that might come up.
Yep. And
is it even going to work on that crazy metric paper?
Exactly.
Hang on, let me patch Kavoto in.
This is brought to you by Metric and Multi.
Yeah, I tell you, Sam, I mean, those are all issues that swirl around, and FCH has always been, and I think it's always going to be, a commodity-driven platform. In other words, traditionally, you haven't come to FCH and say, what does ABC company have? You're looking for a quarter 20 grade 8 machine screw with a specific head and other specifications and stuff. So we show you who's got it based on what you said. And that's a simple example. Of course, what you said in your example is a lot more exotic. What I like in what you just said, though, is that you referred to sourcing as an art. I dig that. It may be an art, that there's a science to it too. It's another one of these things where you could argue about it forever, and that's not very productive, which is probably why I'm attracted to that topic. But I will say that out there in the world today, what we take as an assumption in everything that we do at FCH, and I think what we're all trying to do independently and as we collaborate here, we are facing the fact that the generation of professionals that we're supporting increasingly are less adept at this art, and therefore they need tools such as we're building, such as these AI empowered perhaps tool sets that we're envisioning and that we're beginning to build to assist them.
Exactly. And FCH, in my mind, is positioned in a way in which you are defending the requester, or you're working on behalf of the requester, meaning you're learning how to guide them through that information process of what they're looking for. And you're trying to give them an experience of which, if you guide them just enough, you can provide them really good results of here are potential options. And the call then to the supplier community, the folks with the products, with the capabilities, with the, whether you're a manufacturer, whether you're a distributor, the call is, what are you doing to digitize your data? Do you have your manufacturing capabilities in a way that can actually be read into a digital environment? Do you have your product data clean? And are you thinking about how to present that product data simply to the person looking for it? Or are you assuming they're going to do it? And so, I look at it as again, you have the requester inputting data, and you have the receiver providing data, and the goal is to match those two. So the responsibility of the provider is to digitize their data, and that is all about capabilities. If you've got a CNC lathe that goes from, 1/4 inch up to 2-inch chuck with 28-inch length max or whatever, how do you actually turn that to data? And what does that mean in terms of a fastener, in features of a fastener, or a component, diameter wise, material wise, whatever? All of those are data points, and it's all of that requires that information to be now connected to the requester. The requester says, I need a metal cylinder 2 inches by whatever with a hole in it. So that very vague request needs to be somehow mapped into capabilities. And that's a very far-fetched example, but the reality is there are a lot of components out there that, again, the buyer doesn't care about. They just know they're being asked to buy it. So how do you help that process along to be very quick, to be very easy, and to be painless? Mm-hmm. Sorry, Anders, you were going to say something, and I...
Well, I was thinking about how that connects with what Eric was saying earlier about the art of it. And I think, for some of the wider audience, the idea of, like Eric was saying, if you have a part number of a Makita drill, you're like, I can Google that. I can find that. And there's no art there, but also no demonstration of expertise, because you are looking for a particular thing. You're not looking at the end goal, which is what you're talking about, Sam, because you're saying that not only do I have to understand what it is I'm looking for, I need to know what am I trying to accomplish, because certain things I might need to bring my experience in and say, it's not only going to be the size of this thing. I also need to know, what is your manufacturing capability? What's your timeline? Potentially, what is your material sources? And the only reason I know that is because I overheard that my buddy Tommy was saying the general needs this, and so it has to be U.S. domestic. So all of that stuff, you're not looking for the Makita M235-B. And that bringing that experience into it, I think is not obvious to someone that is outside procurement. I was thinking that maybe for many people, if they're outside this, the more down to earth example of the complexities of procurement. And disclaimer, I'm not any kind of a foodie. I like eating food just as a human being, and I'm not a huge cook either. But I have one grocery
I've
store.
seen you eat, Anders.
I mean, that brisket was delicious. I'm not going to deny that. It was amazing. But if I want to go get some good roast beef or fresh tomatoes or apples, I go to this one grocery store. But then if I just want like rice and eggs, I find that this other grocery store actually has a better selection. And this is the most basic thing, because I could say, okay, Jonathan, go get rice, eggs, roast beef, and apples. And you would think that would be easy. And yet it turns out I'm driving 4 miles in 2 different directions just to accomplish that. And that is because I'm evaluating essentially the supply chain of the 2 grocery stores and how good they are at bringing in those 2 items that you would think would be commodity. You'd think anyone can get apples, but turns out one of these guys just sucks at it.
Yep. You bring up such a great point, Anders. Everybody has the ingredients for the pie, but who makes the best pie? And in the case of the sourcing of buying the right ingredients, who's got the best apple? There's actually a lot of experience that goes into finding the right apple for the best apple pie. And not every provider is the same. And actually, this now speaks largely to my first point about we're not talking about the Makita or the Milwaukee tool. We're talking about a product that can be provided by a myriad of suppliers. And while they all may be able to provide you that finished product, the steps along the way are what make them the right supplier. And it could be quality driven, it could be price driven, it could be service driven. And these are all factors that the buyer, the procurement person has to know as it relates to their specific business, which all of those sacrifices along the way of learning about product data. This is why you have 8 different kinds of low carbon grade 2 bolts out there, because somebody was sacrificing maybe the quality of the material because they just needed a price point and it was for a very low application. It wasn't a non-critical application. But somebody who has a very engineered specific application may not need a grade 5, but they've engineered this grade 2 per spec into this application. They need it to work exactly like that. And there's, that just cut out 15 of the 20 suppliers that provide this thing because they can't really make it to that spec. And only the buyers who are in that situation have understood the pain that's gone through the learning curve of knowing that. They've been burned a few times. And so they're looking for control within their processes to make sure that never happens again. That usually comes back in the form of data.
Yeah, they've literally ended up with bad apples.
Yes, exactly.
I think a lot of the nuances of the sourcing process are known to you guys for sure, and to a lot of people who possibly would be listening to this conversation. And I think that it's also pretty self-explanatory that the world is looking to AIs or technology that's calling itself AI, put it that way right now, to address some of these issues, given what we said earlier, that our crop of digital native sourcing professionals are relying more and more on this kind of tool. So that puts the challenge on guys like us to figure out, how do we actually go about training this technology to achieve what we're describing here? This is what everybody's standing around looking at each other, waiting for somebody to make a breakthrough on, in the realm of fastening I'm talking about. You hear amazing stories every day about applications everywhere, but I haven't really heard one that's impressed me so far in this area in fastening. Have you guys?
Dude, I've been looking. I've been looking so hard. And admittedly, my focus has been looking for AI success stories within the ERP space and within that software and technology space, and to find applications that are actually like, you can buy this today and it exists today and you can use it tomorrow and it actually does something. That list is super small. It is not nearly as widespread and functional as the press releases would have you believe. So, I mean, there's some invoice processing, there's some marketing stuff, there's a little bit of that, but the stuff that I've seen that is like we are fixing business processes, very long on announcements, very short on me seeing those show up as results in anyone's financials.
Sam, who's knocking on the door? Come on, you got someone.
I haven't seen one yet. I've seen a lot of promises, and I've politely just asked, "Show me your tool," and then when I start asking the hard questions, I get crickets in a response, because every sourcing solution that I've seen come out has essentially required one thing ahead of time, and that is a catalog. Meaning, if you have in a B2B relationship, you've got a customer and a supplier, right? Or a customer and a vendor. And there's terms within that relationship where you've got a pre-built cross-reference catalog. You've got a preset catalog. And so any of the sourcing efforts that have come in has already matched points A to B, i.e. points supplier part number to customer part number. And there's assumption that, if I take a picture of this item, it's going to give me, I want to take my phone and snap a sourcing request in. Well, it presumes that there's already an existing catalog in place between those two companies, essentially between the manufacturer and the supplier relationship. But by nature of the scenario, the reason that buyer is taking a picture is because it's probably not part of their catalog. And it's something that they need on the fly, and they need help finding the best source. Now, usually in those cases, price is the least amount of their concern. They need the product, and they need it quickly, and they just need to find the right supplier. But the sourcing tools themselves are not helping what a human would do of the hours and hours of scrubbing through websites to find that picture matched to the best likely source and then provide a solution. I've not seen that. And again, I'm within the context of this, I'm going to keep it to fasteners or commodities in that regard. So you could include electrical components. You can include some of the HVAC in an industrial type OEM components that are out there. I think they're fair game in this space as well. I'm not seeing that that's being done well. And there's a lot of presumptions, like I said, that are required in order for that to actually be successful. This is a call. If somebody's got a tool, DM me on LinkedIn. Sam Aldinger.
Well, you did a lot of work for Fastener building out their e-commerce platform, and I believe it's really more of what we'd call conventional technology foundation on that, right? I mean, it was never touted to be an AI platform, right? So it may be these days growing into that. I have no doubt about that. I mean, Fastener is a giant, and they are a progressive company. But I guess that's really side to my question. You must have been looking over your shoulder at what Grainger's doing with Zorro. Maybe you two, Anders, have those guys been letting any AIs go that you've seen that are doing some good things?
I haven't seen any within those spaces. Most of what I've seen is a fairly arithmetic, hey, you're interested in item X. Other customers have bought Y, Z, and I and J. And so we're assuming that those are related because they tend to get bundled together. But I haven't seen super AI within those platforms yet. Sam, have you come across any?
I have not. What I've seen across the industrial marketplaces in general is just a focus on data quality and actually more on what I would call product display or merchandising. McMaster has historically been a dominant player in fastener product merchandising. Anybody sourcing for OEM components usually likes the way McMaster lays out their website. Grainger's made pretty significant milestones or progress in their fastener data. So somebody's clearly focused on that. But in terms of tools for sourcing, again, I haven't seen it. And usually, when you go on to the folks like Zorro or whatever, it's just a search game. It's a product search game. But you've got a captured audience in that case. You are only buying from one company, i.e. Zorro, and all of their suppliers, obviously. But you're buying through their marketplace. So you got a captured audience.
Well, you're also dealing with a user community that expects to have elastic search and they expect to have really solid product recommendations and things like that. I mean, that's all out there in really the high octane e-commerce platforms already. So what we've, I think, agreed to here in this conversation, and we stumbled into the fact that the AI-enabled sourcing, or at least just, let's say, full-featured sourcing, is still a unmet frontier.
Yeah, I think you're correct, because if you say I want a fully AI sourcing, you'd be able to say, hey, I want a bolt that's about the size of my pinky and needs to go through like two super strut channels, the regular size, and it should be able to figure out, okay, well, he's talking about 1.5 inch square, and his pinky's probably a 3/8 because that's the normal size of the slots on super strut, and figure out all that stuff for you. That would be the equivalent. I mean, if we're saying artificial intelligence, I should be able to have that conversation with the guy behind the counter, and he'd be like, oh yeah, you want a 3.5 inch 3/8 bolt for that, because I had described it. And there's nothing in AI that is close to that level of comprehension or bringing that amount of experience to the sourcing effort.
And so until we get a large amount of Fastener people with Neuralink, where we could just tap into the global brain, that where all this stuff is already just out there, until we get to that point. So what I'm fishing for is, how do we train our AIs to do this kind of work? I mean, I think that's the big, this would be the secret sauce. I don't think we're going to give anything away here, because I think that a lot of people have probably struck the same question. And if it was easy, they'd be doing it.
How much has anyone gone the route of taking some of the spec manuals and dumping them into language models?
Yeah, I'm sure that's been done a lot of ways by a lot of teams. But again, we don't see the fruits of that anywhere, really.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any. If somebody's doing it, I'm not seeing. It's proprietary. It's somebody's keeping it for an internal use or something. I'm not seeing it as a public domain or a public service.
Right. Somebody's got to be taking a stab at that, even if it's just for more of a vision of a more conventional kind of a marketplace idea.
But even the spec sheets, all that does is create a massive data library. It does not tie it to product. So there's a search connectivity piece to this. So now, again, I'm going to have a 0.25 by 1.25 hex head cap screw, and the inquiries, you have to turn that digital inquiry to something that is in that library, and then you have to do a lot of transformation to that data to make it tangible to the buyer. And so there's just a lot of work there that almost needs to be built and pre-structured. Again, AI is actually not that great with structured data. AI is very good at unstructured data. And so the training of AI actually has to train the user, or anyone successful in here would have to train AI on not looking at the whole, but actually following the logic of the structure in these little pieces. And this is where your Elasticsearch and more search components, this isn't an AI thing, it's actually more of a search thing. And there's a lot of conversation out there, on the, AI and search and kind of the differences between them. Again, you then have to also match that to who's got this product. So not only do you have this large library of spec information, you have to actually create physical product, and you have to actually tie it to somebody who provides the product. So there's multiple databases that need to be created in order to take on this feat. And in my mind, in my estimation, the industry at large, if you were to look at this as in your technical mind, Anders, you've got this is a high complexity, high value proposition. This is a high complexity, low value proposition. This is a low complexity, high value. You put it in the quadrant of this is high complexity, low value, at least as it's perceived in the industry. And I'm saying the broader industry. I'm talking all of B2B. You've got not only industrial distribution, you've got the construction market, you've got the medical distribution, you've got all of it, many of these different industries out there. And this type of a challenge seems to be pretty unique to fasteners or to commodities. And so it's low value, high cost, essentially, or high complexity.
Yeah, I don't think it would be common for you to hear, we took the best guy in the company and we put him on finding someone to sell us bolts. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
and so even if it may be like, dude, it is going, onto a literal rocket. We kind of need the right bolt there. I think you're right that the perceived value is low because someone up top is like, well, you just buy it, right? We just buy it from somebody. Isn't that what we do? But there's, because even when you find it, like you were saying, Sam, we're all three of us are customers of McMaster on at some point, and I certainly love with McMaster the idea that I can be extremely sure that what I believe I am buying is what's going to show up. The categorization, the detail, the individual pictures, the grids, but also I'm like, like 4 bolts for $38. I mean, I get that they were specially a brass or like whatever, something. If I wanted to buy 40,000, yes, McMaster has them. I would never go to McMaster for that.
Well, they wouldn't take you. They would tell you to go someplace else.
Yeah.
Everything I know of McMaster is they don't want that type of order. They'll actually direct you to their supplier.
Yeah. So, and that's sort of, that's exactly what you're saying. The difference between the search part of it and then supplying as far as matching up all the other pieces of that business need, the quantity, the timeline, the delivery, the supplier materials and everything.
So on one side I say that, but then I'll also think about the countless individuals out there in this industry that are having to do this on a daily basis. And while it may seem small in the broad industry, there's a massive amount of labor hours that are being consumed in the consternation of this process of making and matching their company's needs to the right supplier at a reasonable price in the right time. And nobody wants to pay the $38 for the bolt, but when the machine's down and that $38 is nothing compared to the machine being down, doesn't matter. How do you help that individual find that to keep the machine up? Because again, we're not talking about the tangible piece price anymore. We're talking about, general machine time or loss of revenue at a company because of what they couldn't have in the right time.
Right.
And,
yeah, that's the blast furnace.
Yep. And good companies will monitor this and track this. But do they put it on a sourcing budget, or do they tie it to a sourcing KPI? No. They really don't. Not that I've seen. They look at it as, just the cost of doing business, and they're not directly attributing it to maybe these sub parameters that would cause that machine to go down or whatever. That's just one case, or that production line to go down.
Yeah, that would be a pretty interesting sort of report to read. Like, let's say you had something, a power plant, power company, or maybe like an aluminum smelter that like we deal with so much electricity, and every 10 seconds of downtime is $200,000 lost in productivity, and I have no idea what the numbers really are. But if we spent an extra $100,000 on procurement talent each year, how much would we recoup on reduced downtime? Like, it'd be a fascinating, analysis. And you're right, Sam. I've never seen someone say that our downtime is X, and we're going to fix it by doing this in the procurement department and inventories and stocking and inspections or whatever. They're mostly just looking at the overnight FedEx bill.
You're describing the technocrats' wet dream, Anders.
I can dream.
Reminds me of the old joke about the boardroom meeting where the team is developing a very complex, very, very high risk, but very high possible reward project. And the senior guy says to the junior guy before they break for the day, I think we've thought of everything, but why don't you come up with a list of all unforeseeable circumstances, and we'll present that tomorrow morning before we go ahead. That's the kind of thing that you're basically asking these tools to factor in. And I think that's why everybody's looking at the ceiling when they actually think about how you do what we're envisioning doing here. The more you peel back the question, as we've been doing here during this conversation, the more you appreciate how multifaceted that fine art of fastener sourcing is, and the practitioners are quite valuable team members, aren't they?
I think so, and I think that this discussion of nuts, bolts, and commodities probably speaks to why the fastener industry is so collegial, in that everybody gets together and you talk about hey, what can you do, what can you build, because it is not digitized, because it is such a unusually shaped set of variables, that where we are now, the current solution is I need to know that I've got these 7 suppliers that do these different things, and I know that I can count on them because they've done this stuff for me before. And I know Bobby over here, and I know Davey down there, and Johnny always helps me out with the stainless stuff because he's a whiz on that stuff. And there's so much legacy in this industry because we have machines that have been running for 80 years, still churning out bolts with absolutely super quality. And there's not yet existing a fully digitized, fully digital twin of all these industries and factories and capabilities. And so we're just down to I know the humans, and I'm going to call them up.
I'm going to play devil's advocate because first of all, I agree with that. But so the devil's advocate perspective here is, while that is the case, the customer's demands don't change. So, hey, industrial distributor, I need cost neutral on tariffs. And while that may be unreasonable, any good customer worth their salt, smart customer is going to do that. And they're going to expect that you as a distributor are servicing them by ensuring, resourcing activities, by ensuring cost downs, by leveraging your procurement arm, and essentially mitigating industry events like tariffs. And tariffs isn't the only thing, but it's just hot in our minds.
Sure.
And so the practice of the industrial distributor is to ensure that they've got mechanisms in place to respond to these events in a way that is efficient and effective. And that requires resourcing. So not only are we looking for this most simplistic, perspective or the of I just need this staple or paperclip. Sorry, yeah, that's easy. But in the grand scheme of things, when you're talking production fasteners, when you're talking OEM components, these are critical to the, and while they may be a smaller cost basis of the overall system, they still are a cost to the system. And when they're going up 15, 25%, whatever, the customer's asking, how do you mitigate that for me? And so resourcing is actually, again, an art of how much drain in your labor are you going to spend on resourcing? Because that is a very labor intensive process to create bid events, to go out and find new sources, to qualify those sources, and even to change your buying over to a new source, because there's a lot of things along the way that are very disruptive.
A lot of friction in booting up a new supplier, sure.
And there's no tools out there to help in this, in my mind. The best tools you've got in this case are buying groups, essentially, that say, we're going to try to do this on your behalf for you. Just give us the easy button. But are they really giving you the easy button, or are they just controlling the purchasing and leveraging it? Which is something you could ultimately do as you grow. So they're in, anybody who thinks through vertical integration knows that, those buying groups make money. They're not passing this service on for free.
Sure.
So
they are in business.
There is the room on the table. Now they have much larger volumes, but how long are you going to stay with that buying group then before you realize you can do some of that yourself? But again, those don't assist in all of the sourcing functions. They just try to give you a means to say, just give us all your data and we'll do it for you, and cut us a check and we're going to take 15% off the top or whatever that is. So I just see this as, I'm still yet to see tools that come in and help procurement in sourcing, in leveraging their labor, in optimizing, their needs, which are cost downs, quality improvements, supply chain disruption. These are all sourcing reasons why you would actually go and source, to the benefit of the buyer, to the benefit of that organization, in a way that helps them. And it doesn't, I'm talking a little idealistically here. You don't do that overnight. You can't boil the ocean. You have to take it in small steps. And that's where the industry, the camaraderie, or I can't remember what word you used, Anders, but collectively, manufacturers and distributors have to work together on this process. And maybe it takes a middleman. Maybe it takes an FCH to help make sure that, the best interests of both sides are in play. Not that it's all manufacturer biased and you're just trying to steer towards one or two companies that are paying you all the money, or you're not all buyer focused, where, you're just trying to squeeze every price penny out of the manufacturer. You're here to make tangible connections in real life industry needs around sourcing. And can you do that in a way that benefits the industry at large, not just comes and sucks one entity?
Yeah, it wouldn't be hard to imagine a massive vacuum trying to suck all the value out of that, because we've seen that in other industries, whether that's conglomerations or buying other businesses out. But I think when we look at FCH, what we see that I think is certainly the seed of the solution here is it is an ecosystem, and it has the network effect, similar to any kind of social media thing, where you say, you look at Facebook or any of them, that a big part of what's going on is it works because there are a billion people on there. And you look at FCH and you're like, there are, and I don't know what the number are, thousands of different companies that are already in that ecosystem. And that's sort of, I think, the only way that you're going to get the required volume of network effect is to have that. It would be easy to imagine some perfect database, but you're like, dude, there's 3 companies using it. It's not enough. It's not enough. All using some universal spec of fasteners, which I'm sure Mr. Brian Musker would tell us does not exist and possibly cannot exist. But until then, I think a collaborative effort like FCH has going, where everyone is contributing data, but also benefiting from that data existing.
Exactly.
That's I think that is the route toward having some solutions. I at least feel good about it, the direction it's going.
Well, having been part of manufacturer-distributor relationships for the majority of my career, there's definitely value in data that the manufacturers could glean. There's definitely value in data that the distributors can glean, both from sourcing activities as well as selling activities, and in understanding complementary aspects of your business. And there, there's so much information that can be used to help develop a sales runway, a more robust supply base for risk mitigation. It's a two-way street for data and data sharing, and so there's real opportunity in leveraging that and benefiting that as a to your point, as an industry, as a group of folks that can benefit from this teamwork.
Yeah. Well, guys, I'm right on board with the basic idea that you're discussing on this part of the conversation, with the network and the power of it and the various derived benefits that it offers. And I think as the technology-enabled world evolves the way we think that it's going to over the next 5-10 years beyond, I can't even imagine what it's going to be like after it really takes off. But a lot of people who are thinking about these things are wondering how they're going to differentiate themselves. And, even the old standbys like engineering expertise and things like that seem like they're going to be in danger. I mean, how do you dig a moat around something like this, like we're facing? But the network really is, if it's a unique organic entity unto itself, that could fit the bill. One of the aspects of the network, at least the one that we've built, is that it has these integrations with other networks. And I'm speaking specifically right now of the networks of ERP platform users. So we've integrated with different ERP platforms. Some of them are really the standards for certain segments of the industry. Mid-sized distributors is what I'm talking about at this point. Anders, you're really making a name for yourself in that niche, and you're building a module to support SourceFinder from the ground up, really. So it'll be sort of native to your platform. What do you see as the benefit for your platform in doing this? And like, how do you envision building a thing like this?
There's a couple pieces to that. Yeah, we're building that. We're building it in. We're working with some of the new technology that FCH is bringing forward on sort of the. And I don't know if you'd call it a version 3 or version next or whatever of the next round of technology improvements that
we just call it Luigi.
So we're targeting the Luigi platform. And for us, what we see is that by bringing this in as sort of a little more than I just want to find this bolt, to do some slightly deeper integrations to say, if I have this set of tags that exist within ALOX 4, maybe I match those tags up to various categories within FCH to say, I'm going to allow some mapping back and forth so that when I am looking at my internal tags of, stainless 316, hex cap, I already know that that's going to map over to the FCH categories that they have in those areas. Then beyond that, we're looking at connecting to slightly more than just the sourcing to enable some deeper RFQ integrations. Because usually it's a rarity that someone's looking for just one thing. You're not looking like you don't need just the bolt. You usually also need the nut that goes with it, and maybe a variety of lengths or the washers or whatever else. But it's rare that just one piece is the only thing that you're needing. So we want to work on the idea that we can find the connected pieces. Once we have one piece, show me the related pieces, build up a multi-item RFQ for that, and then tie that into the vendors that we have within ALOX 4 itself. And also, if you're finding new parts, from a supplier that maybe you haven't used before, can we pull the data from FCH and say, all right, let's create a new vendor. Let's get some of that paperwork done automatically based on what FCH already has. Let's pull in those part numbers that we're trying to RFQ for, match them up to our internal part numbers, build those connections automatically, get all of that stuff done so that we can send the PO over without all the manual work of doing all of that stuff, piece by piece. Because, as Sam says, there's a bit of a grind to churning out that paperwork. So we want to integrate that a little more deeply, which is, I'd say we have an advantage in this area, just because our stuff is fully cloud-based anyway. So, all the servers live in Sky, and, having that full-time connection to FCH, all the time would let us do that slightly more easy, just because this goes all the way back to the very beginning of the conversation. The technology stack, the infrastructure stack is built for connecting all that information. So that's what we're working toward, is to sort of take that next step from just the search, from just the finding, and then do an assist in the sourcing procedure. That's what we're working for.
Are you connecting to, this is actually interesting, are you connecting to PIMS at all?
Have not yet connected to PIMS.
because in general, any distributor that's going to have a massive product library will likely store most of that. They'll supply they're going to supply or store the product data itself, the characteristics, the nature of the product, what it is, the pictures, all that stuff is going to be in the PIM in general. Now, some ERPs have basic, structure, taxonomy structure, but most don't carry imagery or anything like that. I'm just curious if you had any discussions in that regard, because now you're getting another system involved. That's one. And then I've got another point after you answer that.
So we've been we haven't supported pictures yet, and this comes back to scale. What we found is that most of the distributors that we deal with, like under 30 million, they're small enough that what they end up doing when you give them the ability to have pictures is they take one picture of a bolt and they copy it 10,000 times, and it's the same picture. And it doesn't end up moving the needle on making them more productive. For the taxonomy of that you can go through the tagging. Some of our customers do very minimal tagging, and it's like 5 categories. And some of our customers are super deep into it, and their tag tree is about 200 levels deep. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe that's overkill, but that's what they want to do. And so they are tagging the material, the spec, the length. Is it metric? Is it M6? Is it 30 mil? Is it inch? And they're all the way down through that, and so they can do very detailed multi drop down kind of searches internally. So
coincidentally, this is where I think FCH stands significant value in that they can help validate some of that data or normalize that data for product matching, for making sure that descriptions are consistent. There's a lot of things, I think, Eric, on your side that can bring pretty big value to that, especially if a company doesn't have a PIM. But even if they do, it would only complement the PIM, because it would help make sure that it translates their PIM data to somebody else's, potentially, for finding the right supplier, or deduplication, or there's many different things, services that could be done around your product catalog.
Do we have is there and this is a project that, like, just even thinking about it, I'm like, okay, this is like a somewhere between a 10 to 50 year project. The idea that
we're full of them, aren't we?
I know.
Now let's challenge it to be 5 year instead of 10.
Right. Well, I mean, there are certainly many ways that you could describe any particular fastener, and many people have their own favorites. Could you get the industry on board with saying, this is how we want to do bolts? We are going to put the length first, or we're going to put the head first, whatever it was, whether it's length, and this is why I'm saying it's 50 years, because you'd have to churn through so much data over that time to normalize even just the presentation structure of the description of the fastener.
I think it could be done. I think there'd actually be an appetite for it, at least within your integrations. And a lot of that can be done behind the scenes. If a distributor or a manufacturer wants to keep their product the way it is and not change the flavor or the design or the marketing aspect of however they want to manage their data, there could be a key on the background that essentially could be done the way you're describing, that would allow people to connect and standardize their products across the industry. The reluctance you're going to have there is people want to keep their cards close to their chest and not give away their standards, so that they can be unique and not give anything away to their competitors, things like that. But as with anything, the more standard you get, the more commoditized it is, but I mean, what's more commodity than a piece of metal, right?
Yeah, and I can't believe it. We've been talking for over an hour and we haven't really even brought up the scrubber yet, because the scrubber definitely plays a role in one aspect of this bigger picture. And we've had some success in retooling our scrubber system, which has been in development since 2007. It's just a giant group of libraries and programs that function to identify fastener inventory, cleanse the data, normalize it, categorize it, that kind of stuff. And Brian and I have used that to run FCH and to do custom data jobs for all kinds of companies for many years. This is widely known. But over the last year or so, we've done a lot to try and refit it or update it to fit into the LLM idea, to bring it into the AI world, and so that it has a machine learning component to it. And, I view that as a very vital piece of what we're doing, and it's coming along really well. It's got lots of its own challenges, and it's just a subset of what we're talking about, but we're bumping into it here, so I'm just throwing it in.
Well, that's the great, that's your transformation conduit. That's essentially if the scrubber allows then companies to connect without having to standardize per se. Or it could assist companies in standardizing that want to use it.
Well,
so
it takes a big bite out of the potential universe that we encounter. As we know, there's still this giant pile out there that it's made to print. It's just stuff that nobody's seen, and it's not readily identified using a standard. And that's the stuff that people are looking to, some of these new technologies, some of the optical recognition, transferred into a vector drawing that is then it is converted into a database that we can map to. I mean, that's the Jetsons kind of technology that we all envision that doesn't quite work yet.
I had an idea just while we were talking here, Eric.
Oh, great.
And you're like, this sounds like more work for me.
Need the light bulb to flash above your head.
I know. Boo. But this idea of standardization, what if there was a way to go bi-directionally with the scrubber to say, like I have an ALOX customer, and I'm going to submit my inventory to you and say, hey, FCH, please tell me how I should actually redo my descriptions to an industry standard, better ingestible norm.
Yeah, we do that
I'll take your...
Yeah, you're right on. I mean, we do that in a piecemeal way now. It needs to be automated. It needs to be put into a much cleaner process. But yeah, the idea that you're talking about exists in nascent form already.
And what Eric and Brian have probably, I'll give you the benefit that have probably thought through, but essentially are super close to with that functionality, is essentially to do complete data audits and data scoring across your catalog. That would be very helpful. Now, there's some challenges with that, but I think overall, though, you could have here's your grade. Company ABC wants to upload their catalog, and Eric could spit right back to them. Here's your data quality. Here's your gaps. Here's your grade. And here's actually an action plan for you to go up and clean that.
Yeah.
Oh, and potentially here's even suggestions on how to clean it. There's a lot of different things you could do there.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Maybe that's the round 3 of the integrations that we build with ALOX. That'd be super interesting.
100%. Yeah, we've put that off to the side because we took a big bite out of it already with what we have on the table, but it's sitting there. I mean, it's just sitting there. So, all right, well, there's a lot of different ways that you could take a conversation like this. Obviously, we just said turn on the recorder and see what happens, and not a lot of laughs in this discussion so far, but
sorry, we're being
that's what my face is here for.
Well, Sam, so we were doing our first sort of experiment with video. This is going back a couple of months, remember? And out of nowhere, I think we were on a Teams meeting, and you made some gesture, and an AI picked up on it, remember? And it embellished what you were doing, or it put like a thought cloud over your head, or remember that?
There was something like a thumbs up, or I think Teams does that. You can enable gestures or something like that.
Yeah, but this was just spontaneous. And so, to Anders, when you had that idea a minute ago with the light bulb thing, I was surprised that it didn't just show up, or given that we had Mexican last night, I'm not sitting here with my own kind of icons floating around me right now, but I mean, stuff like that. I mean, anything's possible these days, right? So, but so far, none of that's appeared on this particular video chat.
So check the settings. Master, step up your game.
I don't know how that plays into fasteners other than maybe if we enable video chat in the sourcing piece of it, it'll just eavesdrop into the conversation and just start flashing visuals of exactly what's being discussed, as a visual aid. Yeah, they're right there. What's over your left shoulder? That's what I need. Send me 10,000. I need them by Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. We'd have a lot of beer getting sent over.
Yes. Well, I think we all have high hopes for the future, and we had high hopes for this conversation. We're going to reel it in here, I think, because we've got a lot to put on the virtual artificially intelligence-enabled so-called cutting room floor, and probably some of it will make it through, but we'll have to see what it is. So this has been a good experiment so far. Thanks for doing it with me.
Well, thanks for having us. It's been great.
Happy to be here, Eric. Thanks.
We'll come up with a title and all that, or maybe we'll just let the machine do it. All right, Sam Aldinger, Anders Green. I'm Eric Dudas. Thanks for listening. If you have, folks, we'll talk to you later.
Ciao.
Cheers.
Fully Threaded Radio is a production of Fastener's Clearinghouse.